Hey guys, so I was in the middle of another project and I realized that I don't have a way to cut this dimension into a side of another board. I wanted to set these legs into a shelf that I'm making and I don't have a way to do that. So the way I'm going to do that is with a cross cut sled, which I don't have. I've decided I'm going to go ahead and make one. I'm going to make mine to use a DADO blade for this first piece. I have some old plywood here. I've been sitting on this plywood forever. It's actually from a shelf that I had built with my grandfather years ago. And I've just really held on to it more for sentimental value, just wanted to find a way to utilize it into something. And I had built it with him a long time ago with a shopsmith, if anybody knows what those are. So it's definitely got some memories attached, but what better way for this thing to live on but to become part of my tools, right? So some of it has warped, but I believe I can correct that with some gluing. I'm gonna pick the straighter pieces and I am gonna create this to be a little smaller. So I've got a 20-inch depth piece here that I can pull from. I've got many pieces that I can pull from here, but I'm basically gonna take this diameter of 20 is gonna be my width because I really don't need it to be super wide. Then I will cut it to probably about an 18-inch inside. So maybe another 20, maybe 21 to leave some overhang, but we'll get into that. Plenty of pieces here for the rails that's gonna go on either side. As you can see here, got some bowing, not the best, but I believe that I'm gonna be able to glue this up and get a square finish basically by causing the lamination with that glue. I'm not working with any plans or blueprints. I'm literally just making this up as I go. Watched plenty of videos out there. I've never made a cross-cut sled either, but I've watched plenty of videos of what goes into them. I'm still gonna have to figure out what I'm gonna use for the sliders here. Probably just a piece of this that'll have to cut to fit that size. My project is only gonna end up being 20 inches wide, which will sit just barely over these two rails here on my table saw. Not gonna be as wide as some of the others you've seen out there, are typically like maybe 30 inches wide. They can be super wide, they can come off to one side for stop blocks and whatever else. But again, this is for a dado cut, and my plan here is to be able to have that fence that I will then be pinning a board up against on its end like this with a set of clamps, basically, and then I'll be able to run that through, adjust it, run it through in order to make those notches out to the markups that I'll come up with at that point. But again, let's get into it. So I've got my miter saw out, still don't have a home for it, but basically just set it up on the project that I'm working on. I'm not gonna be cutting these plates yet, as I'm gonna be gluing these up first, and those are gonna have to sit anyways. So these rails that I have here, they are actually just a 1/4 inch shy of 48 inches, so 4 feet there. I am just gonna go ahead and cut them in half, and that way it's about 2 inches over what I was planning to have as excess, but I can trim them down after that. So I'm gonna be using this 3/4 inch plywood, 2 of them glued face to face for front and for back, which again is just the normal style of crosscut sled that you've seen out there. It's the very generic version. Again, I'm not following any pre-made plans or anything, completely making this up for the project I need, which you could as well. So I'll find the half on this, 47 3/4. Does not have to be perfect, but we will get as close as we can. All right, so 23 7/8 is where we're gonna be cutting this down to. And I'm gonna cut both of them at the same time to save time. As long as I can line those up, because again, they are warped, so not all of them. I mean, this one is warped the worst, but again, I believe once I glue these together, I'm gonna be able to get a nice square out of them, so we'll see. And again, for the style cut I'm doing, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'd like it to be pretty decent though, because again, I want to keep this, so we will see. With warped lumber like this, a glue up is a better solution for being able to use it, because that glue can restore some of that. So I'm going to clamp it together here just to make sure I'm holding them tight. Okay, so now I'm also seeing that I've got a bit of flex from top to bottom there. Little bit of a gap. It looks like maybe a little over 1/16 of an inch, maybe 1/8 of an inch. Not a big deal for this cut because again I can trim it down, but definitely something I'm going to need to focus on when I glue it together. I could completely pin that together with clamps when I'm gluing it, but otherwise I could also fix that with a run through the table saw. We'll see what happens when we get there. So I have the 4 rails cut down and we're on to gluing up. I've got my parallel clamps out. I've also got these Clampzillas that I'm not really a fan of. There's a video out there, y'all can go and watch on that, but they are a pain in the butt. But for a smaller project like this, they won't be as bad to deal with because I'm really only making 2 glues here. And then they will help with bringing them tight together from top to bottom. So that's why I am incorporating them in on this one. I will probably use another one of my parallel clamps in the middle here. Once I get everything glued up, I'll throw that in the middle there. But otherwise, yeah, so I got the glue ready to go as well. Good old mustard bottle here. Probably need to replace it here at some point. It's getting pretty beat up, but that's kind of the point, right? So nothing fancy, just gonna glue up each of these faces. Gonna go ahead and put glue on both sides, just to ensure I get a good bond. Good old-fashioned glue applicator here, provided by God, my finger. At some point, I will get into that glue bottle review that I've been talking about, but too many things going on in front of me to be able to get to that. So, could certainly use a paintbrush, or there's rollers out there that look like they work really well, especially those vinyl style that the glue can dry on and then snaps right off. Would be great. But I don't have one right now, so using what I got, my finger. These 2 pieces actually ended up with a bit more glue than the other one, so I'm gonna swap those out. Put the opposite 2 together. There we go. Stand them up. And again, I'm not gluing this backside here. You don't want to let any glue get on there because it'll make it tough to get them apart. But otherwise, stacking them together like that, might still have to pry them apart a little bit if any squeeze out comes across the top of them. But this way, can glue both rails up at once. A little tight. And then again, these clunky creations, I am not a fan of them, but for pressing things together, they actually do okay. Again, getting them together is the frustrating part. If you guys have looked at any of these style of clamps, specifically these woodpecker Clampzillas, you can go watch that other video. And I find it pretty interesting that even their own videos don't show you how to assemble them. So that tells me they're aware that they're not the easiest to work with. But the premise being that they press together as you are tightening them together. And so the premise is good, just the design is clunky. And I don't know that that's necessarily a dig at them either, because I don't know that I can figure out how to do it any better. It's just, it makes it where these are not ideal for any type of larger glue ups as your glue starts setting in before you actually get everything set up, which has not been ideal for me. It's about as good as we can do for some warped boards there. Okay, and you don't really have to crank on these. I have a bad habit of doing that. I always want to make sure that everything's as glued as possible, but I don't know that I'm increasing anything. I think it's actually been proven that you're not. I don't think I'm going to need one here in the middle, actually. It looks like they are holding together. So I'm going to wait for this glue to set up overnight, and then I will be working on the next part. All right, guys, so everything's dry. We're back the next day. Let's see how it turned out. So we'll see if these actually manage to glue up straight or if I'm gonna have to make some sort of corrections. Again, since I'm attempting to reuse wood that I already had. So this piece right here is that part that actually had a good chunk of the bow in it. It did not let go of all of that bow. Didn't quite work perfectly, but this one did. And so what I'm gonna be able to do is this can be the actual pushing fence where that will be perfectly straight because this one is squared up. This will be the one that I'll actually be attaching everything to, and I need it to be straight. This one can go on the outside without any issue. The bow that's in it is actually very minor, but definitely not something that you want to use for measuring against. It won't really matter. Just needs to be able to be cut through basically and hold everything to shape. But this is actually going to work just fine. So I'm going to move over to cutting up the bottom panel, getting that cut to size, and then we'll move on to the next piece. All right, so I've got that flat piece that I've come up with for making that base. We're going to call this the backside, like the outside that it's pushing away from you, not the side you're grabbing. This is going to be the side that I'm going to be holding on to. But for that first panel going on the back, I've got an 1.5 inch diameter on that from that glue up. It's actually a 1/16 inch over that. But otherwise, I want to account for that. That one's going to go all the way to the edge of this board, which is going to be fine. I just want to account for that size there. So I'm going to mark that up here. And then from there, I wanted to have 18 inches on the inside. My table saw itself is a 22-inch diameter. So I know when I get past that point here, I'm gonna have to be able to pull that back without it tipping over. That's why you don't wanna have these things too long necessarily, because they do become like a tipping hazard where you're kind of fighting to get it to come back towards you without it falling off the table. So I'm gonna go ahead and call this 24 inches that I'm gonna cut off from this. If it's a little bigger, I'll cut that excess off, but I just wanna make sure I have enough room where I wanna set that handle and again, have enough excess on the outside where I'm gonna be putting my hands. I wanna put some other safety pieces there where you don't put your thumbs in the middle and stuff. I'm sure you guys have seen that on the other YouTube channels as well, but I'm gonna go ahead and cut this down to 24 inches. Alright, so here's the board. With that being the back edge, I'm gonna line that all the way up back there. I still gotta cut these pieces down, but tentatively, that's how it'll look down there. Yeah, so next I will measure these down to the exact 20. I've got a little bit of overlap on each one that's gotta be cut off first, and then I'll measure them down to this 20, and it's actually 20 and 1/16. Yep, 20 and 1/16. So I'm gonna measure them down to match that, and then we'll get them to be attached. All right, so this cut that I'm about to make right here, it's really close on the fence here. I don't really have a choice. I attempted to measure it the other way as well. It's too thin for my planer to get it down to that depth, but in order to make these rails here, I've come up with, it's about maybe 1/8 of an inch, 2/8 of an inch, that you could go a little more as well. But in order to hit that depth, this is how I'm gonna have to cut it. I'm just gonna use a sacrificial piece behind it in order to push it through, and then I'm gonna have to shut the saw off. I don't have anything that's gonna fit through there safely. So that's how we're gonna do it. I've got my sander out here. I'm just gonna do a light sanding on this piece here. The next step is putting the rails on, and I just wanna make sure that when I put that CA glue, there's no dirt or anything on this, because again, this lumber has been sitting stored for a bit, and it's definitely got some dust and stuff. So I'm just gonna do a light sanding, make sure that I've got a fresh surface there, clean that up, and then we'll get to attaching the rails. All right, so I got my base, I've got my rails here. What I've done is I went ahead and put these little nuts from some spare nuts and bolts that I have. I'm just using these to hold the rails up. So basically they'll be able to fit in the grooves here. That's gonna hold them left to right, exactly where they need to be. But then this is gonna hold the rails up to make sure that all of the weight of this board here is pushing directly on this. I'm gonna put some weight on top of it as well, just to make sure that when it glues, it is all gonna glue tight to the rails. So nothing fancy there, you just need something to hold it up. But as you can see here, the rail will fit in here just fine. And then the board's gonna sit on top of that. And that causes the rail to stick above the table saw itself, ensuring that it's gonna adhere to this. I'm just gonna be using some CA glue for attaching this. The rails themselves aren't very thick, they're a 1/4 of an inch. We'll see how this goes. And then I do have the option, I could countersink some small screws, as long as it fits between these two. Countersinking on a 1/4 inch is not much. It would just give a little bit extra, but you would need to countersink it to make sure that it's not scraping on your table saw as you're using it. Again, I'm using this for a DADO blade, so I'm gonna measure to find the basic center that I can, knowing that my blade is gonna start here, and I'm gonna have up to a 13/16 inch, which is the width of my DADO blade. I'm gonna want to center that on this board here. That way when I make that first cut for applying the rails on each side, it'll be squared to the center there. So I've marked 10 inches here, side to side. I've got a 20-inch width. I took that 13/16, split that in half, so about a 1/2 16 is gonna be in there, but that 6/16 over, splitting that 7th one, I'm gonna measure from this in, and then I'm gonna use this rail to actually place the board down to make sure it evenly goes on the glue. All right, so just double checking that my bolts are where I want them, and we're good there. We'll put these rails down, make sure that they are squared up with the edges of the table saw. We're gonna use this rail here to help set this evenly on the glued up rails in those tracks, but otherwise, I've basically found my rough center there and then locked this into place. But this will give us a nice even way to lay this down without fidgeting with the rails or anything else. So we want to line this back piece up to make sure the start of our tracks are going to be with this back part here. If they're not entirely on this back plate here, it's not necessarily a big deal, because this is where I have my excess that I could trim off if I need to. So normally when you're making the track pieces here, you're gonna want to have them go the full length of your piece here. I cut mine down to the length of my table saw, knowing that I'm gonna be removing some material here, most likely. So I'm gonna take the CA glue, and I'm just gonna apply a bead going down both. This stuff, we know it dries really quick. We wanna make sure we don't put too much where it's not squeezing out on our table saw. We can clean that up if it does, but attempt to prevent it so you don't have to clean it up. But get enough on there that it is going to adhere to this board nicely. Make sure I put the sanded side down. That's the whole point, I sanded it, right? But here we go. All right, again, make sure we have those track pieces exactly where we want them, and exactly where we want them in reference to this, and get them laid down. And just applying some initial pressure here to make sure that they stick. And then otherwise I'm gonna put some other lumber and such just on top, whatever I can put right on top to add some weight. So these pieces here are the reason I needed to create the sled. These are the shelves that I'll be using the dados to notch out for the legs that I talked about earlier. All right, so now I'm just gonna let this glue set up overnight to make sure it's completely dry and I don't have any issues with separating those tracks. At that point, I'll make a decision if it makes sense to countersink some screws to also reinforce that. It wouldn't hurt, certainly if they could get knocked off, but that CA glue works really well. I do think that's gonna be enough to hold it up, but we'll take a look at it. The panel glued up overnight, so now let's take a look at how that turned out. Everything stayed in place really well. Everything looks really tight actually, so I believe we are good with just that, and I'm not going to actually countersink any screws on that. We'll see. I believe it'll hold up. It's only sliding with the rails here, so not a lot of knocking should happen on it. If it doesn't hold up, can certainly add countersunk nails later on. Just probably have to sand the bottom, remove any glue, and then reset this process. But otherwise, let's get to putting the front and the backs on this. So first I'm going to put on the rear rail. Again, this one's got a little bit of a bow in it, but it doesn't matter so much for keeping the project square, because the square is going to come from this side over here. The bow is very marginal anyways, but again, this is just more holding it together for stability. So ultimately, I'm just going to flip the whole project over and then use this rail, this rear rail, as the guide of where I'm going to put those screws. So this is the rear here. All right, so it doesn't have to be any type of perfect for what I'm doing here. I just want to make sure that I capture enough points that it's holding everything stable. And you definitely want to make sure that you are not putting any near where the blade will be coming through. So don't put any screws there, because the blade has to come out the back. Just kind of creating a middle point, maybe a no screw zone. So probably just going to put one on each end here, one just inside the track, and then one right before where I created that centerpiece. I'm going to pre-drill the holes. Then I have a counter sink bit here. So I had these little 1-inch screws I thought might be enough. Now I don't think they are. I don't want to glue the front and rear plate on just in case I ever need to make any adjustments. I am just going to attach mine with screws. So I swapped over to these. I've got these 2-inch SPAC screws here. I really like the screws that have any type of fixed head, like the square or the star bit, rather than your general Phillips. You just don't get any slip out. But otherwise, I'm going to utilize these to go through here and into this plate here. So now I'm going to go ahead and get this piece clamped to this. So I'm just going to put the screw holes that I made through to the second piece there a little bit, just to make sure it follows where I wanted it. Honestly, a screw in each corner would probably be enough, but I'm just going to make sure it'll hold up. All right, so for this front rail here, the rail we're going to be holding on to, it's going to require to make that first cut. I'm just going to use the normal table saw blade to get a straight line. From that straight line is what we're going to square the fence back here off of. So now we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to use the saw blade that's already on here, not the dado. I'm going to use that for my straight line for setting it. But in order to do that, it does require we remove the writhing knife, because otherwise you can't press this through, you can't raise it through. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that off. We're going to make that cut, and then we'll get on to the front fence. And we want to get that cut down to here as close as we can where we think that fence is going to be, because we're going to use that line to basically true up. All right, guys, so with this other rail for the rear and a square, we're gonna square that up to this blade cut that we made. There is a tool coming out from, I believe it's KC Tools, where it'll actually sit down in this blade cut and make it where it's a perfect fence. It's like 150 bucks. So for what I'm doing here, it doesn't make sense for me. If you're doing a lot of cross-cut sled builds, it looks pretty awesome, so check that out. But otherwise, I'm just using my generic square here. The fence, I do want to put these plates on the end here. As I had mentioned, these are going to be basically a finger stop, so I know not to put my thumbs there. I want to make sure that I have my 20-inch gap in between. So I'm going to measure that out. So what I've done is I've marked my 20-inch line here. I'm going to go ahead and trace that line across. I am going to set the fence with one screw, and then we'll be able to adjust the other side to perfect square. All right, so same thing as the rear fence there. I'm going to attach this with a clamp, and then I'm going to get this first screw in, leave it a little loose so we can make a spin there. All right, so my other clamp didn't actually reach where I needed it to, so I'm gonna overkill a little bit with my parallel here because I know it'll reach. I've got this lip on the back that I just couldn't quite get to without making the stock kind of rotate. All right, so we're gonna flip that over, get one screw in there. And I'm just using these blocks that I have to hold it up since it's offset off my bench there from the clamp. Then otherwise, we're gonna get a screw right here at the end so we can pivot from. And again, we're gonna countersink this one. All right, so we can remove this clamp. Now we're gonna use our square. We're gonna square it up to this line. And then we're gonna clamp it back in place. Again, using the line of the saw cut as the guide, not the fence. You want to make sure you're squaring up the line. All right, guys, so I'm going to throw a clamp on this corner here. Make sure it holds in place while I'm moving it around. And then I'm going to double check the other side, which I believe will be perfect. All right, so with this squared up, I am going to put in the rest of the screws for this side. Again, no glue. That way, if I need to adjust the square at any point, I can make those adjustments. All right, and you also want to square up the back of this board. So with putting these finger blocks on here, I'm going to utilize those to make sure that I am at square. So putting these on like so, I'm going to screw them into the fence themselves, and then I'm going to screw them from the top up, and then we should be good. Again, mindful of where that blade's going to be cutting through. Nothing too special on the blocks back here. Again, they're just going to be sacrificial. I'm attaching them to the fence as well as one in the bottom. Again, mindful where that saw blade is going to be coming through because you don't want it to hit any screws. So the important things for making a crosscut sled for your table saw is square. Of course, you want to be square to this blade as we talked about, and squared on this rear fence. So I had built it entirely intending to notch out this shelf that I'm working on. I have these legs that I intend to set on the side here. To notch these out, I plan to create, basically ensuring that I've got a perfect right angle here. I'll probably use another sacrificial piece on the back here to create a higher fence utilizing some clamps. And then I will clamp this one down as well, and then use the fence to make those cuts, measuring out and marking up exactly where I want it to this line here, and then just moving this board over, clamping it down again, moving it over, clamping it down until it fits the lines that I'll create to match this. So that's the reason I needed a DADO sled. It just is gonna help me knock it out a little quicker. You could totally do that with a normal saw blade as well, and then you could chisel out the little pieces that are left behind. But this just seemed like it was going to leave me a cleaner option, so I chose to go ahead and build a DADO sled. Now when it comes to these sleds, there are so many things you can do. I needed this for just this simple project right now that I'm doing with the shelving, but I know that this crosscut sled with the DADO is going to be something that I'm going to be able to use. It's definitely safer to work with the DADO with a crosscut sled as it is, because that's a whole lot of spinning blade right there. So I didn't need to do anything super creative or intricate to make this any better than it needed to be. This is a super simple build, but there are so many things you guys could do with this. You could also put in dovetail tracks that'll help you tie it down while you're cutting it versus having to use a clamp back here. You could put dovetail tracks on the back, on the sled itself, going perfectly perpendicular to that blade. There's so many different things you could do. You guys have probably seen a bunch of those videos out there, but again, I didn't need any of that. For my purpose of this sled here is just strictly going to be DADO. Maybe on a future table saw sled that's just a normal blade, I might put some of that more creative stuff, but there's a lot of things you guys could implement into these. So if there's something specific that you're attempting to put into your sled, get creative, look it up, see what the options are. You can incorporate so many of them. So with mine, the one change I am gonna end up making is on the back here, I'm gonna put a little bit deeper of wood right here, just kind of like a tail, little box on the back here, probably use 2x4s or something, and basically just gonna have that be a zero clearance over the saw blade. So that way, when I push all the way through here, I don't see the saw blade on the outside here. I don't have any risk of anything shooting at me. I don't have the annoying sawdust shooting at me or anything else. But most specifically, I don't have that saw blade spinning right there on the back side of this. The whole point of having a zero clearance like this is it helps block some tear out anyways. So there's no reason that that saw blade needs to be visible on the back. So guys, I appreciate you watching my content. If you have any tips and tricks that you think I should check out, if you have any ideas that would have been better on a table saw, or if you guys have any feedback, I'm always looking to improve, so I welcome all that as well. All right guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like what I'm doing here, please like and subscribe. I'd appreciate your support. And I've got a lot of content planned, aiming to do a video a week, good Lord willing, depending on everything that's going on sometimes. But otherwise, keep making sawdust, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Thanks.